Hey, so this video is going to be a little bit different from usual. I'm going to be talking about very well known, very popular but divisive film series, book series before that, Twilight. Now, I'm well aware that in talking about this, I may well leave myself subject to ridicule because there's a perception that Twilight fans are teenage girls. Um, am I a fan? Well, not in the sense of screaming girl at Leicester Square fan. But I'm just going to say it. I like Twilight. And in this video, I want to explain why. Now, first thing I want to mention is I haven't read the books. So I'm saying I like Twilight from the perspective of the films. And I'm well aware that there will be people who consider that almost blasphemy, but that's just the way it is. And having watched the films, I want to get the books. Now, let's just look at the facts. Whatever people think of Twilight, it was an enormously successful franchise. There's no escaping that fact. Very, very successful. 5 films, best-selling books. Stephanie Meyer, I would argue, is probably one of the most prolific living authors today. Now, the criticism or the ridicule comes from sort of two sources. Number one is the more academic sort of criticism, which comes from critique of the plot, critique of well, no, that what I'm talking about actually that criticism comes more from criticism of the connotations that the books and the films are supposed to have, particularly from feminists. I'll touch on that in a minute. Um, the other comes from predominantly guys, some women as well, who kind of have lumped Twilight into this almost like same as Justin Bieber. It's like, oh, it's something for teenage girls. Like you have to be gay if you like Twilight, or you have to be have bad taste or something. I really disagree with that. I think Twilight is very creative. There are also purists who say that the whole concept of vampires in Twilight kind of destroys the concept of vampires, but surely that exemplifies the creativity, the fact that Stephanie Meyer has given a new concept. So these aren't vampires living in crypts, getting out of coffins, and have long capes. I think it's refreshing that she's given something new to the whole vampire genre. Surely it would be boring if she just went along the whole cliched line of things about people in long capes and Transylvanian castles. So for me, the creativity of Twilight is very good. People say there's no character development. I haven't read the books, but I think each character is intriguing in their own way. All of the sort of secondary characters in the Cullum family have their own backstory. I think that's very interesting. I also like the whole concept of this rival clan of wolf shapeshifters. Um, I understand that there's this perception it's for teenage girls because the whole Team Edward, Team Jacob thing, but I really believe that there are plenty of heterosexual guys out there who like this series but won't admit it. Um, and I don't mind people not liking the series. So if anyone doesn't agree with what I'm saying, I totally respect that. It's fine. It's all down to opinions. So I'm not a die-hard fan in that sense. But I do think some of the ridicule of Twilight's a bit unfair and a bit ridiculous. So that academic critique I was talking about coming from feminists, I want to touch on that a little bit. Their argument is that Bella Swan, the main character, is led by men. Well, there's an inherent flaw in that argument to begin with, because the men, Edward Cullen and Jacob Black, aren't actually human in the conventional sense. Edward's a vampire and Jacob is a shapeshifter. So it's a strange argument to make that she's controlled by men. These guys are paranormal creatures. They're monsters, for want of a better term. So it's a bit of a strange argument to make some sort of social statement on this. Um, Secondly, I don't entirely agree that it's true. What Stephanie Meyer argued was that she wanted to show Bella as human. So she has all the flaws of a human being. It's not a gender issue necessarily, it's a human issue. Versus the fact that Edward and Jacob especially Edward, is a vampire. He's not a man; he's a vampire. So that's an inherent flaw in their argument. But I also have to say, you know, feminists seem to be absolutely obsessed about. They talk about Bella not having control, the character of Bella not having control, but this is the hypocrisy of feminism. They want to sculpt her into like a Lara Croft type figure, um, and it does seem that in any literature or any films nowadays, if there is a damsel in distress type character, feminists will pounce on it and say, "Oh, but that's sexist. How dare she be, led by men or whatever?" There's many bits in the series actually where Bella does not only stand up to Edward or Jacob, but gets into heated rows with them. And in the film I'm watching now, Breaking Dawn Part 2, she exercises her physical strength over Emmett, who's the strongest of the Cullen clan. Okay, it's since she's become a vampire, but that surely flies in face of the argument that she's a weak character. In fact, that's a point that feminists overlook, the fact that the female vampires are very powerful. Victoria is one of the most powerful vampires in the whole series, so they're overlooking that fact. They're powerful female characters. Um, but to me, it's just an example of feminists wanting to dictate things their own way, which is a bit hypocritical because for them to denounce Stephanie Meyer for that is just utterly ridiculous. I mean, if that was a male writer, their criticism would probably be even harsher. Stephen King was pretty critical of Stephanie Meyer, and he was comparing her unfavorably to J.K. Rowling. I believe his words were, "The difference is Stephanie Meyer can't write worth a darn." Now, I've respect for Stephen King. He's an enormously prolific author. He's been very successful, but I don't have much respect for writers who disrespect other writers. What's the point of it? That's the job of critics. I mean, what? I don't know why Stephen King would feel the need to do that, to denigrate another writer's success. It just looks petty, quite frankly. And there's just no need for it. It's a bit like an artist slagging off another artist. What, he doesn't have to like a work, but I think that's a bit um, unsportsmanlike, for want of a better term. He can have his opinions, but it just seems to me a bit petty to be slagging off another writer in that way, when, as far as I know, she said nothing negative about him. Um, so yeah, I just don't get the critique of the Twilight series. I think it's very entertaining. I think it's original. I think that there's memorable scenes in all five films. Some are a bit stronger than others, but yeah, I just don't get the critique of Twilight. Now, I know purists would argue, well, vampires aren't meant to be like this, but you know what? It's original. It is original. I don't know how, on one hand, people can say, "Oh, it's boring, it's rubbish," whilst on the other, ignoring the fact that she experimented with new concepts. So, yeah, this is just my opinion. People don't have to agree, but I like Twilight. I'm just going to say it. Now, if I read the books, would I have a different perspective? Maybe. That's another thing. People always compare books to the film series made out of the books. Same with Harry Potter. The fact of the matter is, no director in the world can make a film exactly loyal to a book. It's just impossible because you'd have to put every single detail, and the cinematic approach that directors have to take is different from the way a writer writes in a book. Now, I'm an ambitious writer. If I ever get my work published, I would accept the fact that a director may have to change some of that, make it more marketable. People need to understand that fact. So I'm going to round this up soon, but you know what? The hell with it. I like Twilight, and I think it's a good series. I think it's entertaining. I don't think it's sexist. So another thing, people argue that Stephanie Meyer is sort of bringing in her own agenda. If I read the books, maybe I would agree or disagree with that. But in the end of the day, it's meant to be entertainment. People shouldn't take it so seriously. It's entertainment, and I think it does what it does. You know, um, so that's my opinion. But I think Twilight gets a bad rap when it shouldn't. It's very successful for a reason.